Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this talk on silver. I decided to actually use objects and explain to various aspects of how silver has changed over the years. When we look back into the Tudor period, for instance, England actually imported a huge amount of its silver from Germany, from Augsburg and Nuremberg, and Wolsey and the king both collected German silver. The point about most of the English silver that we know today, i.e. the Georgian period and so forth, all this came about with the revocation of the Edict of Nantes at the end of the 17th century. When the Huguenots invaded England, I say invaded, they were invited into England, some 40,000 of them. And at the time, when you think about it, there was only 700,000 people living in London. So 40,000 immigrants turned up, but they were all, well, not all, but a large proportion of them were actually artisans and produced the most fantastic pieces, including, obviously, silver. And during this period, the end of the 17th, early 18th century, we come to the Rococo. And I got a wonderful Rococo tea caddy here. Now, this would have been part of a set. These were actually done in threes. You had green tea, black tea, and a sugar casket in the actual, what was known as a tea equipage, which was the wooden case that these all sat in. And because they actually came, the tea came from originally Java, in point of fact, but actually then came from China and so forth. The chasing patterns and so forth on these pieces are with a Chinese origin. And a lot of Rococo is always done, obviously, with shell forms, which you have on the front of the piece, and, of course, with these European stylized ideas of what the Orient was all about. And the reason for this is that during the 18th, and even up into the 19th century, right through to 1910 in point of fact, Oriental wares were always considered slightly exotic and so forth. But when this came in, of course, tea was extraordinarily expensive. So that's why you have these wonderful tea caddies of the period. Tea was approximately £4 a pound in the 18th century. And that, you can understand, was when a live-in maid was actually earning only £10 a year, if that. Now, of course, the 18th century, as well as the 19th, was full of novelties. And this, in point of fact, believe it or not, is a cow creamer. And you fill the back bit there, and the milk comes out of the mouth, as opposed to the udders in this instance. And these were actually made by a Dutch master called Schip. And these were brought in, made in England, and they became very popular at the period. And reproductions of these were made all the way through the 19th and early 20th century. And one firm I know in London was still making these by the 1960s. The only thing is, I must admit, don't use it at home, by the way. If you look inside here, it's full of little nooks and crannies and so forth. And quite honestly, I don't think you could clean the inside properly unless you put boiling water and some solution in it. And of course, if you've got rotten milk inside, it's not the best thing when you're actually making tea. The most useful, shall we say, of the milk jugs and cream jugs of the period, this one is from actually just into the 19th century. This is 1805, and it was made by Peter and William Bateman. The point about this is that twofold. One is that in English silver, the decoration goes with the period. So we have here the Rococo period. This is slightly plainer, made during the Classical Revival period, although it's very limited in its classicism. And here you have the cream and tea. You'll have to excuse the clock in the background. I do apologise. Didn't realise we were going to go banging off. you have this, what we call bright cut engraving on the cream jug. Now, the Bateman family invented this style of decoration on English silver. It is cut by engraving as opposed to this, which is a casting, then with on the tea caddies, cast panels and then chased. And chasing is done with tiny little punches and a hammer tapping them out. The Batemans are very well known. Hester Bateman is the famous lady goldsmith of the 18th century. She was married to William Bateman. They had Peter, Anne, William, and John, 4 children. John is the rarest mark. He only lasted about 3 or 4 months in the firm, so actually it's quite an interesting mark if you can find one. As I say, these are all tea-based objects, and so is this, which is a wonderful thing that this is. This is actually a beehive, as you can see, and opens up, and then inside you have a little bottle with a pourer, and this was for liquid honey. And the honey was used to sweeten the tea. And this little piece is actually Russian and was made in the middle of the 19th century. Wonderful novelty. There were earlier versions of this in the 18th century, and also one English manufacturer of the very early 19th century called Paul Storr, who actually made a number of these. But I don't think, I'm not sure, but I'm not saying, but I don't think you see quite so many bumblebees across the store models as you do with this. Now here is an interesting piece of manufacturing in point of fact, because the base of this is actually made from sheet silver metal, and the top is cast in sections and then soldered together, and then the top here, the bottle, is made in frosted glass with a silver cap on the top, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. The other major player on the table as a condiment was salt. And salt starts in the Tudor period, in the middle of the table, in the magnificent silver gilt table centerpiece with a rock crystal centerpiece where the salt was sat. Now, the point about this was salt was desperately expensive, and then slowly, as the 16th and then the 17th century fade out, it becomes very much a household condiment found on all the tables. But of course, this lovely piece here is what is known as a trencher salt, and it comes from the Queen Anne period. So we're looking around about 1700, and this one's about 1710. She dies in 1715, and then we get George I. But no spoon. And the reason for that is you take a pinch of salt. And hence you have that common expression these days, everything taken with a pinch of salt. And that comes from actually using that at table. The other thing is that the table centerpiece salts was the fact that if you were an honoured guest, you sat above. And if you were not such an honoured guest, you sat below. And hence, were you worth your salt? And therefore, that's how that one comes by. So all these things have little stories attached to them. Now, of course, come the 19th century, everybody wanted what I call slightly novel items. And here we have a wonderful example. You have a shell which is sitting on sprays of seaweed and little bits of coral and things like that. And that has the matching spoon with it, and the silver gilt on the inside. The gilding on the inside was done simply to protect the silver from the salt. You must never leave salt in a silver item. It is actually an awful thing to do, because you get these awful black spots on it, and they are a devil to get out. Now, during the early part of the 19th century, of course, we had a little bit of a contretemps with dear old Napoleon, and then we finished him off in 1815 at the Battle of Waterloo. And this wonderful salt is in silver gilt, and very much in the Regency style. You have these wonderful sprayed legs with little padded paw feet. scalloped top. And that was actually made in 1815 at the time of the battle, just on the Battle of Waterloo period. So all these little bits are known as the Waterloo salts. But if you want to go to modern with a lovely old twist to it, I think this is beautiful. This was made in 1960s. It's a salt, and it's a salt in the form with little ammonites. Ammonite is a marine creature from the Jurassic period, and their fossils are found all over the place. And here you have this wonderful organic shape with this beautiful ammonite on the top, and the spoon has a tiny little ammonite attached to it. Again, gilt on the inside, gilt in the bowl of the spoon, and that protects the silver from the salt, which is most important. Now, thinking of 1815, as I was with this piece, brings me to a little knife, which is actually a soft cheese knife. Mother of pearl handle and silver blade. Wonderful little number. 1815, perfectly normal, soft cheese knife, fine. You would pay a limited amount of money for it. But what elevates it into a fantastic collector's piece is the fact that there, on the blade is engraved the first cricket match. It actually comes from the print that was done for the first cricket match. And this sort of makes it just that wonderful, really special, wonderful feeling. And thinking of the fromage, as says there, this is a Georgian cheese scoop. I must admit, the green handle, by the way, is a stained ivory, which was not uncommon at the period. And this one dates from, 18th century. This one's from 1795. It is a marvellous piece of engineering. You just push this forward, you scoop your cheese out of your Stilton, out of your truckle of cheese, and then you push forward and serve it on the plate. Now, the point about these things is it's great fun because a number of people have never seen these, and so I on one occasion took it to one of these quizzy night things and said, what is the object? And we had some very weird answers on this one. I think the worst one, and I do hope they didn't mean it, was they thought it was a gynecological instrument from the early period. And I just prayed to Lord that they didn't mean it. But never mind. And this is wonderful. I love this sort of thing. This is for serving vegetables or small peas and things like that. And that you scoop out and you allow the water to drain, so therefore you can serve it dry. Now, the great thing with this is, of course, you can take that off and use it as an ordinary serving spoon. I always refer to these, by the way, as sprout rackets, because boom, it's the only decent thing to do with the Brussels sprout, as far as I'm concerned. And that's, what I know these as. I'll have a generic name, sort of basting spoon. These aren't. These are just large serving spoons. Basting spoons were normally made of ordinary metal, and you certainly wouldn't supply the staff downstairs in the kitchen of the period with a silver spoon of this quality. But I'm also thinking of things down in the kitchen. We have this, which looks for, sort of the ideal thing that the Colonel did it in the study with, sort of thing from your Cluedo days. It is, in point of fact, a meat decorator, not a meat skewer. This is the one thing that a lot of people get muddled with. Now, what happens is you have your baron of beef, you have this in the middle, two smaller ones either side, and you have ribbons going through. Then you have cut your vegetables that meant to look like flowers going round your beef. And then this was brought in by the butler on the tray into the dining room in great style, and this was then presented to the master of the house, who cut the first slice, and then it was handed back to the Derriere, the butler, so that he could serve up at table. Now, in the Georgian period, unfortunately, unless you bought fresh meat, there was no refrigeration. So things weren't too happy about the way that the meat was somewhat a little bit off. So lots of spices were used. And here we have a wonderful little, what looks like a little pepper pot, but there's no holes in the top. And it's known as a blind pepper pot. And it was for keeping your mustard powder in. And the mustard powder was then popped on the side of your plate and you mixed it with the gravy. And this actually added to the killing, shall we say, of meats and things like that, which weren't too fresh. The other major player, of course, of the period, and we're now still in the 18th century, these also went through into the 19th century, was nutmeg. Well, when nutmeg was first introduced, it came into England in the 17th century for medical purposes. And this is a little late 17th century spice box. And it has a little gilt inside lid that comes up. And there you have the little box for your spice. Now, this would have contained ground spices, mostly nutmeg of the period. Nutmeg is a wonderful story. I don't know, there's a lovely little book actually called Captain Nutmeg. I don't know if anybody's read it, but it's quite a nice little read. But the interesting thing is that also if you read about the Honourable Company, which was the East India Company and Trading Company, they could equip a ship and with crew and everything for a 2-year voyage in the port of London for £5,000, which was a vast sum of money in those days. But to give you some idea of the sort of money that was coming back from the spice trade, if you sent 10 ships out, you would reckon on getting 6 back. But each of those 6, the cargo was worth £35,000. So you can understand it was vast amounts. So spices were very, very important to the 17th and early 18th century people. And then eventually, like most things, they become commonplace on the table. Now, this is an 18th century, as I said, late 18th century table nutmeg grater. The nutmeg sits inside the bottom. And then you have this very pierced, stamped out copper grater. And just off you go. And these were with silver mounts, and this would have been presented at table. So it was not uncommon to find people putting nutmeg into wine, putting nutmeg on their food and so forth, because they all thought that it was actually going to prevent something nasty. And on the last thing of food, this is rather fun, actually. You clip it onto the bowl. It's a silver lemon and orange strainer. It can be used for other purposes, but that was the main purpose these were made. It was to make punches and other sort of drinks of the period. The punch, by the way, if you really want to try this at home, it's great fun. You take 12 oranges and 12 lemons, you cut them in half, you strain them, you put them through the strainer, and you peel the rind off them before you actually strain them through this. And you put the rind into a jug and steep it with 1 or 2 pints of water, depending on how much you want to make out of it and the strength you want it. Then you put the juice into a bowl. You add your steeped water that you've had with your peel in it. So you've got no pips in it. And you could have the odd piece of the pith, and not pith, but the actual flesh of the fruits in it. That doesn't matter. Then what you do is you mix. I've got to get it right now. Yes, 3 bottles of red wine and half a bottle of brandy into it, and 2 or 3 sticks of cinnamon. Pop it into a lovely pan. Bring it up just to the boil, not to the boil, but just under the boil, right? And then remove it and serve it warm of a winter's night. And 3 cups of that, and I can assure you most of your guests won't even know what room they're in, let alone anything else. I must admit, it's the most amazingly strong idea of punch. And they just loved it, and they used to serve it with beautiful silver punch ladles and so forth in these wonderful glass punch mugs, which are fantastic fun. Now, just one quickie on the thing. I take this along with me when I go to do these little talks and one thing and another on various bits and pieces. And I say to them, what is it? And they sort of look at it and say, well, it's a filter for something, isn't it? And I said, well, I suppose it is in one sense. But actually, this is the only one I think I've ever come across. I'm sure there are plenty more out there. This is actually a nipple guard for a wet nurse in the Georgian period, because they used to actually suckle children until the teeth were through. So obviously you didn't want to get bitten, so you had the lovely silver cover, which was sewn onto a piece of material so that you could feed the child. So I think it's one of these great novelty bits, and that's what I love about these things, is you find these simple little pieces that, really sort of, I must admit, I get very excited. I'm like a little boy at Christmas with this stuff. Now, I sort of don't get. Now we think a little bit about travel. Unfortunately, due to this lockdown thing, we sort of not forgotten about it. We're just getting a bit frustrated about it. Well, in the 18th century, of course, you would have travelled by coach, and you would have taken one of these along with you. This is for drinking your wine or whatever and punch as you travelled. And the reason why you take one of these is I don't know if you can all see from there, but it won't fall over. And the more liquid you put in it, the more stable it becomes. So the great thing is it's known as a tumbler cup. And so as you are bouncing along the old road with a coach, here you have this wonderful little cup that actually, sits quite happily without actually tipping the liquid all over you or your fellow passengers. And this one was actually made in 1752. Now, also, you might have carried one of these. Now, this is lovely. This is a silver portable, obviously, sundial and compass. And on the back of here are all the latitudes of the major capitals of Europe, so that when you were there, you knew exactly where to position the north and south compass, and then you could read your time off. Very useful in the summer, but I would think quite useless in the winter, but never mind, we all have. But these were actually interesting because this, in point of fact, was made in Paris. Sorry, I know it's Butterworth. He was an Englishman who worked for Louis XIV. Yep, and this one is exactly that. And he made mathematical instruments in France at the time, and he made a lot of these beautiful little pieces. And the reason for the latitudes on back, by the way, is you have the bird on the actual blade here, and you set the beak of the bird to the latitude that you want, which is marked out. The numbering system is marked out on the actual blade. And that's how you find your time exactly in the various different positions that you find yourself in on the continent. And of course, ladies, when they went on the continent, used to use perfume. Bathing, of course, in the certainly in the 17th and 18th century was not quite. It was always done medically, more so than actually. So washing, but people used to, layers of sort of cologne and so forth. I remember reading a wonderful book on an ambassador's introduction to the French court, the English ambassador to Louis XIV. And he actually wrote in his book, he said, the royal hand was somewhat grubby and smelt of a stale cologne. So I can imagine what the rest of the poor old travellers used to smell like when they were on the road. But this is wonderful. Mother of pearl and silver. And it's actually a little corkscrew for your scent bottles. And scent used to come there in the 18th century, used to buy it from the scent shop. And it used to come in a little glass phial and with a cork on the top. And you used to take your corkscrew and you undo your phials. And the fish is, this wonderful little fish, is actually a toothpick box, which would have been used during the 18th century. A lot of the toothpick boxes, by the way, also, this would have been on a table with the toothpicks in it. A lot of them were, in point of fact, in ivory, were inset with gold or silver, and about that long. And inside the top of the box was always a mirror. So if you were traveling, you probably use one of those more so than you would. But at table, you certainly wouldn't be looking into a mirror trying to pick your teeth, although picking teeth was not uncommon at table in the 18th century. Also, when you were traveling, you'd take one of these. I think this is a wonderful little box. This is actually from the 19th century. This one's an 1821. It's what is known as a vinaigrette. Now, it's a magical little piece. Gilt inside, you'd have had a perfume sponge in this section. Then you put your grill down, which is pierced and engraved. And then you would open this up when you're passing the odd, as you're traveling in your coach and somebody goes, "Ooh, look at that over there," and the armpit was sort of not the freshest, you would actually wave that under your nose. It's a sort of precursor, I suppose, to smelling salts for the Victorian ladies. And they're known as vinaigrette, and the most famous maker of those was a man called Nathaniel Mills, and occasionally you come across, and he used to make not only these, but card cases and snuff boxes. Snuff was very much the thing of the period, and so were presentation boxes. This is a rather splendid snuff table, what we call a table snuff box. At the end of dinner, ladies would retire to the withdrawing room, which was and has now become the drawing room, and actually take fruit cordial and have a gossip, while the gentlemen stayed in the dining room and had a smoke, passed the snuff round and drank port, and then exchanged jollies about either the latest mistress or what was going on the stock market. This is actually a rather splendid box, which was in silver gilt. It's made in the this was actually made in the time of William IV. It is in 1832 and was made and given when the Reform Bill was passed in Parliament. And the Reform Bill was actually to do with rotten boroughs. Rotten boroughs were a thing that in the 18th century you could actually nip out. If you had a huge wad of money in your pocket, you could go and buy yourself a seat in the House of Commons. It was as simple as that. You had to have a sponsor who owned the seat, say my Lord so-and-so, and he would put you up forward. And then there was a passing of monies, and there were 4 or 5 voters in the borough, and they were all bribed nicely to vote for you. So then came the Reform Bill, and that was pushed through by Lord Grey, who was then Prime Minister. And this is a box from which was presented by a member of the cabinet to another member of the cabinet, actually on the passing of the Reform Bill in 1832. But I think for me, I mean, the whole thing with all of this is the fact that when one's looking at these pieces, you have to understand the craftsmanship that went behind making them. And also the fact is that when certain items were made, i.e. the Georgian pieces and so forth, none of the modern technology was available. So they are little gems in their own right, and purely and simply, I think, for engineering and also for the beauty of them as well, the aesthetics. I think they're lovely. This I love though because it is a fabulous Victorian snuff box. But it's not the box itself. I just adore the engraving on it. And it said it was presented to, I've got to read this, Mr. Thomas Payne Keats on his retirement from Messrs. Glynn and Co. services by his old comrades as a token of respect and esteem for the kindness and good feeling that has ever marked his intercourse with his fellow clerks during a period of upwards of 40 years. Well, if you put that on a box today, get sued for it. But I think it's just wonderful. And I came across, and I still think it's probably one of the funniest ones I've ever seen, was a tankard awarded for the best 5 acres of sweets. I think it's wonderful. So I think engraving as well, obviously heraldic engraving tells you who the owners were and all the rest of it. But I do think the part of the engraving is part of the great fun. And I will leave you with this little number, which was made in 1729. It is just a cast small baby candlestick, you think, right? They come in singles. They are known as taper sticks. And this was actually for sealing your sealing wax with. So your candle was actually brought towards you and brought and so that always sat on your desk next to the inkstand and so forth. So that is part and parcel of writing your thank you letters and also sealing and then sealing them. And on that note, I just have to say thank you very much indeed for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.